welcome to this new episode of Frank Talk. This is hosted by the Leadership Dialogue Institute. I'm Albert Dadon, I'm your host today. I have the pleasure of having with me Assaf Barnea from Israel. I will tell you all about Assaf in a moment. I've got Dr. Daniel Dadon sitting in Boston and M.I.T. Gill sitting in Tel Aviv. Welcome to all of you. Assaf.
Thank you.
Assaf, I'd like to start with Assaf Barnea. My first question to you, Assaf, is do you have any relationship to Nahum Barnea?
No, unfortunately not. Would have been an easier question if I would have, but it's I know of him obviously, but no relationship.
I understand that you have started a company called Sanara Ventures, and Sanara does very interesting things. It's working as an incubator. But I would like to ask you, how did you start Sanara? When did you start?
So Sanara is a joint venture of Philips and Teva Pharmaceutical, which is the largest generic pharma company worldwide. And Philips is known mainly in monitoring and now definitely in imaging technologies and in many areas that basically are now on our agenda, which are related to digital health. So Sanara started, I guess, 6 years ago as a joint venture to invest in Israeli-related technologies in the early stage, mainly in digital health and medical devices, not so much in biotech, neither in pharma. And at the moment, we have 16 portfolio companies. I would say that half of which are digital health related and others are medical devices. The focus was basically to tap into the Israeli innovation and look for technologies which might be synergistic to either Teva or to Philips, but not just. So both what is called strategic investment as well as a financial investment as a VC. Basically, we started with technologies that, Teva is pretty much focusing aside from the generic capacity. M.I.T is here and can elaborate, but basically on the things which Teva is doing on the specialty side, on the innovation side, which are related to migraines and related to movement disorder in degenerative diseases, or related to respiratory, or related to pain, which are the four verticals of the specialty in Teva. We are trying to tap into that, into innovation, let it be from TTOs, technology transfer offices, let it be from the Weizmann Institution or the Technion Institution. It could be from hospitals that have TTOs within their operation, mainly in Israel, but not just. We can be licensing technologies, let it be from Australia or the UK or the US, if it's such a disruptive technology, and IP could be licensed, so we can do that as well and build a company in Israel. So we are leveraging not just the relationship between Teva and Philips, but also from the Israeli government. We got a franchise to run an incubator VC from the Israeli Innovation Authority, which works under the Ministry of Economy in Israel. And this is a franchise for 10 years of operation. Now we're in the 5th or the 6th, actually, years of operation. And we're looking to invest in technologies now, which are obviously will be part of this digital health innovation, and the landscape will be changing definitely after the COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, so if we can break down all of this a little bit. So if we go back to the start, I've asked you, how did you find yourself in that space? I'm asking you a personal question.
Sure, no problem. Throughout my career, up till the age of 31, actually, I was playing as a professional basketball. I was playing for Seton Hall in the US, winning the biggest championship, and then coming back to Israel and playing as a professional basketball player for 14 years, part of the Israeli national team. But parallel to that, I did 3 degrees. I did law school.
For which team in Israel? The national team?
Israel, I played when I came back from college from Seton Hall. I played for Rishon, Maccabi Rishon. I played in Haifa. I played in Jerusalem. I played in Holon, and the national team. So it was quite a long career, I have to say, for 14 years, from the age of 17 till the age of 31. But while playing professional basketball, I also did 3 degrees in law, in business and political science and psychology. And when I left the game of basketball, I started my career in the Israeli high-tech industry in a company called Converse, a major telecommunication company. But while doing those things, I was a medical device entrepreneur, and I was helping a company which I was one of the co-founders, a company called CardioSense, for like 10, 12 years. So while playing and while later on doing investment in clean tech, in water and energy, throughout those years, I had this venture in medical devices, and I had my passion in medical devices, which 7 years ago, I decided to get back to medical devices, or healthcare, I should say. I sold the previous operation that I was running, to Hutchison Whampoa, which is a Hong Kong-based conglomerate. This was back in 2013. Then I started as a consultant to the World Bank, to the venture capital team of the World Bank, the IFC operation, and then I pointed myself back to medical. I felt that it's time to fully commit myself, not just as an entrepreneur, but also as an investor. And running Sanara as of 6 years ago when we started, parallel to that, I'm chairing the life science board of the Israeli Export Institution, and I'm helping, I have some other capacities, but my main focus for the last 6, 7 years, aside from being an entrepreneur in the medical space, is venture capital investment in healthcare, digital health, with digital health.
And Sanara is basically your brainchild. You're the founder.
I'm actually, I was brought in by Teva and Philips to run that. There had to be an equilibrium, if you will, between this dance of the two giants, between Philips and Teva. One is a pharma company, one is a device company, and that was the beauty of joining forces together and looking for innovations which do not step on one another's toes. So this is part of where I came in as an objective. I did not come from Sanara, neither from Philips, but rather as a professional, as a venture capitalist, and a professional in between, to make sure that we invest in the best technologies, in the best companies, in the early stage, which is tough within itself to identify a specific patent which may be related to that and worthwhile to put $1 million into that and to give it a chance. Our job is not to duplicate the mindset of Teva and Philips, but rather to take them out of the comfort zone, if you will, and dive into technologies which may not be related at the moment, in the very specific moment, but later on could be disruptive technologies. I came up with one of those technologies, one of the companies that we have called My Home Doc, for instance, which is a telemedicine company, a device which is based on the smartphone, that you can put it on your smartphone, actually like that. And basically you can have 4 sensors, a stethoscope, a thermometer, a pulse oximeter for the oxygen saturation, and an otoscope, which is not in this version, that you can put it in your ear. And all in all, you can conduct 9 primary care testing remotely from your home or from elderly people homes. This is not something that Teva had in mind. This is not something that Philips had in mind. But we invested in that technology some 4 years ago. And now happened to be, because of the COVID-19, all of a sudden the market traction is simply amazing. And in innovation, you have to do that. You have to sometimes step away from the comfort zone of the giants, of the corporates, and invest in related technologies, or not necessarily so synergistic one. And then all of a sudden, the market and reality just brings along some innovation that is a must-do in these days. Remote diagnostic must-do, and this has happened to be one of our more interesting companies.
So Sanara is a portfolio of companies. Is it a portfolio of investment?
Yes. We are an independent company. We're not Philips, neither Teva. They do not have any equity stake. It's Sanara that invests, like a venture capital fund. Sanara invests in those technologies, leveraging capital also from the Israel Innovation Authority. And as an independent company, we are the shareholders in 16 portfolio companies at the moment. This company, My Home Doc, is one of our companies, but we have 15 other companies, some of which are doing AI for CT scans, so looking into incidental findings, misdiagnosed and incidental findings in CT scans in AI through an AI technology. Another company, this is a company called M.I.T. Another company of ours called TaylorMed. TaylorMed is addressing what is called financial toxicity in the United States, the inability of patients, let it be cancer patients, to pay the out-of-pocket expenses. And TaylorMade, it's a software-based company that helps providers basically to navigate and find alternative options to take some part of the portion that the patient needs to pay and let it be.
Do you take a seat on the board, or you take control of the companies that you're investing in? How does it work from a corporate point of view, from a corporate event?
It's a good question. Basically, we build typically when those companies are coming to Sanara, we try to keep it simple, and we build board positions of up to 5 people, 2 or 3 from the entrepreneurs and 2 or 3 from Sanara. So we actively participating in the board of those companies. And this is my team. I have a team of 7 or 8 people, and we are sitting on the company's board. We help them to talk to Philips and Teva. We help them to talk to other corporates, fundraising, financial support, and others. So it's a VC incubator that includes an active hands-on approach, if you will, board position, but also as a shareholder position, trying to avoid mistakes which might be part of an early stage companies. Typically, there would be, in each company, there would be some lack of expertise, and this is why we're here to support them.
Okay, understood. Insofar as the COVID-19 response by the Israeli government, can you give us a few highlights, what happened and at what stage you're at in the confinement? I believe that you started to deconfine.
Yeah, I think what we did with the, for instance, with the Export Institute, which is kind of an extension of the Ministry of Economy, is 2 or 3 operations that were initiated throughout that. First of all, we launched a concept of business continuity. Obviously, the digital transition started before COVID-19, but the translation of that into digital conferences, into the inability to fly and meet people face to face, obviously. So what we did with the Export Institute, and this is basically kind of a business development arm of the State of Israel, and the Export Institute is in charge, well, I would say the export out of Israel, the total export out of Israel is $114 billion. Life science component is about $9 billion. This is biotech, pharma, medical devices, and digital health. So with that $9 billion, what we're trying to do is basically to maintain, and when I'm saying business continuity, is to try and establish and reestablish the relationship with the regions and geographies that we were doing businesses before the COVID-19 crisis. And one of the enabling project, if you will, that we initiated is to launch a catalog, a digital catalog with dozens and dozens of Israeli-related companies with solutions that might be addressing COVID-19 issues and problems and challenges. And this is something that the Export Institute has launched through commercial attaches in over 30 countries worldwide. We have about 45 commercial attaches in the Ministry of Economy that work very closely with the ministry as well as with the Export Institute. And we launched together this catalog with close to 100 Israeli companies, all of which are addressing solutions that are related directly or indirectly to COVID-19 situation. And this is one of the things that we were trying to help and reinitiate the business relationship with some of the providers and strategic partners that were looking for technologies and solutions worldwide.
M.I.T. Gill. So M.I.T. is the director of communication of Teva.
Public policy, but yes, public policy.
Public policy. Is that a demotion or a promotion I gave you?
It's just what I like to do.
Okay, so tell me, M.I.T., in regards to Sanara, what is the stake that you guys have with Sanara?
Teva and Philips were the founding companies. Assaf was the actual founding CEO, the founder. But Teva and Philips Healthcare were the founding companies of Sanara Ventures, and we each have 50% of the venture portfolio. Even though, and as Assaf mentioned, it's a very attractive business model for companies like Teva and for the Israeli government to bring companies like Teva and companies like Philips Healthcare to invest in Israel, because the actual payment and the budget that we have to put in is equal to only at a minimum of 7.5% as equal partners. So the corporates put in 15% of the funding, and the government funds the rest of the 85% of the basic funding to establish the platform and for the operational expenses for the 10-year period. Now, Teva and Philips each put in a little bit beyond on the funding, but we are equal partners in that, and the partnership works very well. We're very complementary between the two companies, and have a very good open relationship both with Sanara management, but also with each other as two, as Assaf mentioned, corporate giants that are partnering in this.
Teva is one of the manufacturers of hydroxychloroquine. So I would like to ask you, how is that going? How is your production of hydroxychloroquine? And has the recent survey that just was published in the United States, I believe, showing that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work on the late stage of the illness, how is that affecting you guys?
Hydroxychloroquine is a medicine that Teva produces for decades. It's a generic medicine that has been on the shelf, available for patients that require it on indication and in an approved manner by the regulatory authorities for different types of indications like lupus, malaria, etc. So Teva has manufactured this drug for many years. We do so in India, in a factory that Teva owns in India, and we are continuing to manufacture. Now, it's true, like you said, that at the outbreak of COVID-19, this was seen as potentially a drug that could help patients that are suffering from COVID-19. It is not our job as a manufacturer of medicines to decide which patient receives which medicine. It is our job when hospitals are requesting a medicine, or when governments are requesting to receive a supply of medicine, it's our job to help provide the medicines for them and to supply the medicines for them. So we did see a very sharp spike in requests for hydroxychloroquine, just like other critical medicines like azithromycin, which is an antibiotic, and other ICU, intensive care unit medicines that are required for emergency medicine, which Teva is the leading supplier. Teva is one little Israeli startup which started 120 years ago. Today is the leading supplier of medicines, full stop, in the developed world, in the United States, Canada, and all Western European countries, as well as other countries where we have a presence like Australia and elsewhere. Teva is a leading medicines provider. So 10% of the medicine supply in the United States, 10% of all prescriptions are Teva medicines. So we saw a sharp rise in request for specific medicines that are used for emergency medicine, like hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and others in
And you've
ICU.
given 6 million doses to the United States?
So we actually donated 10 million doses to the United States upon request. We donated another 2 million doses in Israel upon the request of the Israeli Ministry of Health. And we've donated to over 25 other countries throughout the world upon their request. This medicine and other medicines and other goods.
So, Danielle, this is a very interesting subject, this hydroxychloroquine. But what is your take on the various interpretations of all these different studies? I believe this was started by a professor in Marseille, France. His name is Professor Didier Raoult. And Professor Raoult came up in the very beginning of this whole COVID-19 with a protocol. I believe he has used the hydroxychloroquine with a very defined amount together with the azithromycin that M.I.T mentioned a little while ago. And it started from there. So some countries took on that protocol and still follow it. And I'm talking about countries mostly in Africa. Morocco, Algeria, I know follow that protocol. They seem to be having some similar results as the one that the Professor Raoult has been publishing. And then you've got all those Western countries that have been putting a lot of opposition on that medicine. Today there was, or yesterday there was a huge study that finally was published. But when you look closely at that study, it's not at all what Professor Raoult protocol was talking about. He's always talked about the early onset of the illness. And this study is talking about the the stage 3 or late stage 2, early stage 3 of the illness, which by then that particular protocol apparently isn't working anymore. So what is your take on it, Daniel?
So it's a relatively complex. Some of the questions you had there are, political, and some of them are medical. Yeah, sure. So I think clearly, initially there were, and I think there remains to be, a lack of medicine in the space. And so typically what you do is you look to the existing medicine cabinet and you try to work with what's already been deemed safe enough. It has previous approval around the world. And so, some early protocols were developed that seemed to have quite impressive results on their face value, particularly these ones you're mentioning from the French group. I think there were certainly lots of limitations to the haste of those studies that led to question marks. Some would throw it out immediately, and then others were hopeful. I think it's never wise to be hopeful when it comes to scientific data. However, in a time of world peril, it's a tough one to just stay completely neutral. I think what you're saying regarding the political charged, nature of this, I think that there's certainly some reality there. I mean, not to state that political linkage has anything to do with the science, but there were sides that were taken generally because of vocal people like Trump and others who, took a position to go down that route. That did complicate perhaps the reporting of this information. However, I would say that overall the science portion, the clinical portions, have generally late use, and it does not appear, at least the hydroxychloroquine and I believe the combo, to have any significance that's widely reported as miracle cure, the way that at least those early French, the early French study looked. There was certainly some really impressive looking signal potentially there, and that has not turned out to at least be the broad application space what we've seen. Now, when it comes to the early versus late use, I think that some of that is certainly, I'm not completely up to date to the minute here. These are moving very fast, but my understanding is that the early use could still hold some basic value, but I think that much of the bigger promise has been a letdown, unfortunately, at least as reported by the wider clinical trials.
Early on the onset also of the COVID-19, you came up with a very interesting idea. Can you explain, especially to Assaf and to M.I.T, what you had in mind, and where did you go with that?
So I'll tell this story. So basically, my background is in biology. I did my PhD at M.I.T, and since then, I've been working to build a startup company from the very beginning as a biologist with a magnificent group of interdisciplinary scientists spanning rocket science.
Is this my internet, or we're having a technical difficulty?
I think it's his internet, I would guess, because he seems frozen there.
He's frozen. Is Assaf still here?
Yes.
It's always that the rocket scientist has the worst internet,
Okay, so I'm sure he's going to reconnect in a second. After all, they've got a good internet in the United States. Otherwise, let's go to Assaf and let's wait for Daniel to come back. I believe there is some research made on plasma. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And is that something that is creating a bit of a hope in terms of a vaccine?
I think one or two projects in Israel. One is a listed company called Kamada, and Kamada came up with their production capabilities to extract the antibodies from plasma of a recovered patient and to use them for patients who get sick. So this is it seems to be moving nicely. It's not an injection or anything of that nature in the initial stage. I think it's for severe patient, if I'm not mistaken. And the clinical results have indicated that in some cases it was quite effective to use that. So there may have been another project aside from this company, Kamada. There's some research which is done in the north of Israel about vaccination, which potentially showed some recently some interesting results. There are a lot of projects also in Israel that are working on solution to the COVID-19.
I mean, I believe there is some 70 companies around the world looking for a solution for a vaccine. It's really a space that is super hard to follow. So can you give us a high-level summary about what are the chances of the best projects, let's say the top 3 or 4 projects that come to your mind?
Well, Gilead, for instance, which is a US-based company that came up with potentially a solution for such and others. I think that at least from our side, we do not invest so much in biotech-related or in pharma developments as Sanara Ventures. But what we do see is actually now the convergence of digital health and the ability to develop drugs in a much faster way to come up with the outcome, the results, which not necessarily even related to COVID-19, but also related to the interaction between drugs, or like a project that Teva was doing a few years ago, new therapeutic entities from existing formula to try and come up with existing IP to try and come up with new drugs for different indications. This is where digital health comes in when we're talking about big data and the ability to identify trends or to see correlation which was never seen before between drugs or between people and physical phenomenon of people. This is where the big data and the analytics of big data with huge amounts of patients, let them be on the clinical studies or let them be in the commercial phase. And this is where we hope that also in terms of expediting the processes for drug development and clinical studies, and potentially also for production, there may be some support instead of taking 10, 15 years and $1.5 billion for each drug to come up to the market. It might be a shorter period of time and an expedited route for doing so through using digital health components and big data and analytics and AI to analyze and see the correlation, which were never seen before.
I'll say, Albert, on this one, you either have vaccines or you have treatments. Treatments like Assaf mentioned, remdesivir of Gilead, which has shown some promising results in an initial trial and got a lot of PR around that a couple of weeks ago. And you have vaccine programs which are being led by, and Daniel, I presume, and Assaf know many of these, by a lot of the leading companies in the United States, France, and elsewhere, from Sanofi, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. I would say 2 comments on this. One is that it does take a lot of time, normally 10 to 15 years, and most of these type of attempts fail, both in vaccines and treatment and drug discovery. In most cases, they fail. What the government's been doing around the world, and in Israel, they came out with a special regulation for COVID-related treatments to approve clinical trials and clinical studies on these type of treatments or vaccines within a matter of hours or days, if it's a little bit more complicated, to really expedite and to deregulate the processes, to cut through the bureaucracy, to help get these studies, not to cut corners on the actual studies, because you want to make sure that everything is safe and efficient, but to actually catalyze the study process from a policy perspective. Governments have been working with private industry quite well. and also working amongst each other in collaboration in a very positive manner. And I think the second comment I'll say is that when you have the leading corporate companies of the world with the best scientists that are working also with entrepreneurs where relevant, it leaves a lot of room for optimism that we could see something, a light at the end of this tunnel, whether it be a treatment or a vaccine or both.
Daniel, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Apparently, the whole neighborhood had a little quick power outage. Looked across the street and all the lights were flashing, and then they all turned back on. So yeah, sorry about getting dropped there. And I know I probably lost my turn on introducing whatever I was talking about there.
Okay, well, start again.
Well, okay, so so the question was, what have I been working on, and then what kind of idea was I thinking could be an interesting idea? And it sounds like the question that I heard the other two answering was regarding the development and treatment options which might be available categorically. But so let me just jump in and talk about that background. So anyway, so started this company with a number of really great teammates, and I was describing their interdisciplinary nature. I think that's where I got cut off. And essentially what we do is we have a high concentration delivery technology. It allows you to essentially stuff an entire IV bag full of protein into a really small volume and still have a very good syringeability or injectability, low force. Normally when you take a whole bag of protein drug and you shove it down and try to condense it to a small volume, you get a very thick honey-like syrup, and you can't push it because it's just too thick. So anyways, that's just a physical formulation technology that we've been working on at a company called Electrofy. Electrofy's technology is called Electroject, but essentially, this concentration technology has widespread application throughout biotechnology, particularly in this protein space.
So in other words, Daniel, sorry to cut in, but what you are saying is that you have a technology that is able to inject quickly something that would normally take days, if not weeks.
Way to put it, yeah. So essentially a delivery technology for rapid delivery. Now when it comes to COVID-19, I think I heard of some description of inhibitors, and then we have or some sort of a antiviral category, and then there was the vaccine category. I might break down that even further and say that this antiviral category is made up of the small molecule approaches, and then those which have more of a protein or a large molecule basis. And inside of that approach, I think that it's good to subdivide this. When we look at how these therapeutics work, there are those which serve, if we focus just on the not the antivirus, because it sounded like you guys were talking about remdesivir and the like, but rather in the protein space, you've got those which are targeted against the virus itself as a neutralizing type of platform. And those, you have the recombinant version, and then we have this other one which comes from patients. I think that might be the most promising near-term early option, which would be to take a patient's plasma, or it's the blood from a patient who's already been successfully, through the virus, has survived. You can isolate their convalescent plasma, which contains antibodies in it, these protein molecules, which bind directly to the virus to neutralize it so that it cannot, do its business. That has been taken into the recombinant or the engineered world, and have been produced in order to do that same neutralizing activity. In the next category, there's thinking about how the virus engages the human body. So if I had a human cell and I had the virus trying to get in, there's going to be a key on this virus that, in the case of the neutralizing antibody, we would have blocked. But there's also a lock on the human cell that the key has to use in order to get into the cells. And so some are thinking about blocking the human side as an effective approach to stop the virus from continuing its life cycle. And that would be things that modulate or affect this ACE2 binding, whether it be the expression of the ACE2 or this TMPRSS2, which is the co-receptor, or perhaps just physically preventing that interaction from happening. And then finally, the other category is, going to not be necessarily directed at the virus, but rather the immune system. So these would be immune modulators. So in the case where the virus is really getting a foothold in your body, what your body starts to do is effectively lose control of its own immune system. And you can have these things called cytokine storms. Broadly speaking, there are definitely nuances in the ways that these cytokine storms develop. But if we can sort of depress the immune system, we end up stopping you from killing yourself. That's that last category. But anyways, these are the categorical, and hopefully I got the context of that question right. But the categorical options that we are, working with. All of those protein therapeutics, how link back to the technology I was talking about, generally will have very large doses, and these large doses are not prepared for quick delivery. This rapid delivery is not going to be an option. They're all going to be like intravenous use. And so to decrease that, we would hope to be able to apply our technology.
Okay, Daniel, how are you keeping with your confinement over there? Have you starting deconfining in Boston, or are you still the same like in New York?
So actually, in Massachusetts, the state which Boston is located in, much of the broader areas are starting to go through a reopening phase, which recently began. But here in the city proper, it's still not fully, prepared for a reopening. So they're holding the core of the city to a higher standard than the surrounding regions. We hope that will, appropriately progress. But as you see, around the world, there's a mass, I would say, disobedience against advice to behave in a socially distant way. And so I fear that we'll end up going back the other way potentially. And those places that will get hit the hardest are going to continue to be the cities. But Boston, we're doing a relatively responsible job when I look at, any reporting from other regions of the country. Generally, a hyper liberal city like Boston is going to behave more cautiously in this case. And it has also, I think, that the hydroxychloroquine, just going back to that for a second and how that got politicized, I'd say that another very interesting topic is how the face mask has become politicized. We're almost, there's and it's a terrible thing that should happen, that anything healthcare related becomes politicized. I think it's a big shame because this is just health. It's nothing to do with politics, but it has turned into those who wear face masks are generally a little bit more liberal, and those who are not are a more Trump supporter, conservative, which is strange because you would think they also, at least here in the United States, care about their health. Everybody cares about their health. So it's a strange kind of thing you're seeing.
Well, you would think it's actually the opposite, right? Because if you're liberal, you want to be free without a mask, and if you're conservative, then you want to take a more conservative approach. But it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Actually, how is it in Israel? Do you have the same as in the United States, where everything became politicized as soon as you talk about COVID-19?
No, so I think COVID-19 has not been a polarizing political topic here in Israel. Quite the opposite. I think it's helped to bring a lot of unity at the end of a one-year political crisis and polarizing times. What happened in Israel is that Israel took a very dramatic and drastic approach quite early on, shutting down the schools, shutting down public events, and shutting down flights and incoming traffic, quarantining anyone that would come into Israel quite early on, starting in mid-February already. So early on in the stages, Israel took a very dramatic approach. And throughout the whole process, we have taken If you have Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, we took a Bet Shammai approach of to try to take more of a harsher approach and more of a precautions. That's helped to do in Israel is to, I think, keep the numbers down. So both on the amount of people that have been detected, but especially on the casualty rates, you have seen only a few, and every life, of course, is precious, but only a few hundred casualties here in Israel, which is a relatively much lower amount than all the algorithms that were predicting how the outbreak would happen in Israel would occur. And that's due to both the policy that the government led of precaution, but also to the obedience, as Daniel mentioned before. And this is unlike anything in Israel, but the absolute obedience of the people and the citizens in Israel, which have really taken a strong approach to adhering to the government guidelines in this sense. And you do see people wearing face masks and adhering to the public guidance, even to this day. And right now we're able to open up. So you could see here, I'm back in the office. I have my face mask next to me, but I'm able to go back into the office. Our kids are back in preschool and in school. I have 3 kids. It took a while, but got to spend some good quality time with them. But ultimately, things are starting to open up back here, and hopefully it'll stay quiet and stay safe, and we won't see a second wave dramatically here. I hope.
Is there a controversy in Israel about the WHO? As you know, that has also become a subject that we all talk around the world about their closeness to China and their lack of response in the early onset. What is the Israel's position regarding that?
It wasn't such a, as far as I was reading the papers and on TV, it wasn't such a big issue. It wasn't in the spotlight as it was probably in the US with Trump threatening to stop the support. I think basically those of us in Israel and abroad, but those of us definitely that are in favor of science, medicine, research, and definitely understand definitely now how fragile we are. And I'm quoting Sting, but we have to support science, and we have to support even though there may have been some mistakes and potentially some bad blood between organizations and whatever. We need those to set up the policies globally and foresee, and it should not be just private people like Bill Gates and the others who are lighting and paving the roads for the next crisis, unfortunately. But it has to be global effort, and such organizations, this is my own opinion, are very much needed, and definitely in the US to reinvest a lot of capital in research and innovation, infrastructure which is related to healthcare. Essentially, that will be an enabling infrastructure that can set things back into place. I think it's a time for a jump leap, if you will, in terms of where we can use this crisis as an opportunity to move away from old-fashioned mentality into some cases new way to treat people and a new way to interact with people, and whatever was discussed between the dynamics between patients and physicians. Now the patient is becoming to be in the center. I think this is fascinating. This is where we see it's not necessarily just Dr. Google anymore, but rather the patients themselves. I have here in my office one of the books which is known by Eric Topol, who is one of the keynote speakers in the US, called The Patient Will See You Now. This was written, I think, 7 or 8 years ago or 5 years ago. And now the patient become the center. They need to, they're going to be centralizing around themselves. There will be a lot of solutions, moving away from the hospital, moving away from the physician, total discretion, but rather into an integration of some specialists and into understanding what is going on with patients and with side effects and everything that we were hoped for, and not just compassion as human being, but rather technologies that can surround the patient, understand his status, understand the side effects of certain medicine indications. And this is the digital health revolution. I think this will come more and more with whatever it will be, the monitoring capability, let it be wearables, let it be remote devices for diagnostic, or let it be an expedited path for developing drugs. But the human capacity integrated now into digital and technology with the computing power that we have seen, the last 5 or 6 years, this is truly an opportunity to rebuild the healthcare ecosystem and hopefully avoid 18 or 19% of the GDP in the US, or 7 or 8% in Israel, which is quite balanced to other countries. But we have our pitfalls as well in Israel, and so as other countries, while providing services to the population and to the patients.
Very good. Assaf, can you please tell us where can people find you? Where can they find your company?
Well, in Israel, first of all, on the website called Sanara Ventures, S-A-N-A-R-A, Sanara Ventures. The word, by the way, Sanara, came up 6 years ago when we kind of rebranded this operation. Started with the name Inspired, which was quite used in the Israeli high-tech at least, and we felt we needed to come up with a new name. So it comes from sanare, which means to heal and to cure. It's like the salute in French. It's the same source. So sanare means in Latin to heal and to cure. So our website is Sanara Ventures, and you can see the portfolio companies on our website. We're based in Israel. We're based just 20 minutes north of Tel Aviv in a city called Ra'anana. It's a high-tech park with a lot of companies, high-tech companies, and we have quite a big office. The startup companies, at least within the first 2 or 3 years of incubation, they are based in our office. So we have 1,500 square meters here. And later on, once they get additional funding, they go up and go out, and get their own office. But basically, physically, we are quite in the center of Israel. And on the web, you can see the company as well, the companies themselves, as well as Sanara on the Sanara website.
Are you open for investment outside of Israel?
Most definitely so, most definitely. By the way, both on the portfolio level in companies such as my home doc, but as well as we're now setting up another fund, the Sanara 2, if you will. And we're looking for, could be family offices, could be angel investors, could be strategic investors. This is me as the chairman of some of those companies. I'm looking for additional capital, some of which may be, an A round. It could be a pre-A round, what is typically called in the VC community, like 1 or 2 million. Some of those companies are looking for $5 to $7 million as a post-incubation investment. But also on the fund size, on the Sanara, we're looking now to set the Sanara 2, and potentially LPs who might be interested to invest in a cluster, in operation, which is focusing on digital health, are more than welcome to approach me, and I'll be more than happy to dive into further discussions.
Very good. Daniel, where can we find your technology if we want to have some more information?
Sure. So you can always find me. That's an easy place. But the company that we're working on,
because you cut off.
Sorry. You can find me on LinkedIn, and the company is called Electrofy. So ELEKTROFI.com. So electrofy.com is where you can find out more about the specific technology that I was discussing that can rapidly convert large volume protein injections into quick subcutaneous patient-friendly versions.
Very good. And M.I.T, I think I don't have to ask you. Everyone knows how to find Teva, but if people want to get in touch with you, where do they find you?
First of all, the easiest way is to contact Albert, because he knows how to reach me at any time of the day, including in the middle of the night, and he does so often. But you can, of course, reach me either on LinkedIn or on Facebook. M.I.T Gill is the name. And if you would like to reach Teva, it's better to go to www.tevafarm.com, because if you just go to Teva, you might have to buy some sandals, which are quite recommended, but
nice.
To not be confused. Yes, the Teva sandals are very good ones, but if you want our medicines, go to Teva Farm.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was fascinating.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all. Bye.